I push people to think about what they want out of their career. Like if you're getting everything that you want, fantastic, great for you. But if you're not, what is in your control that you can do that helps increase the odds that you will eventually get what you want?
Welcome to the Tech Unlock podcast, where we demystify emerging technologies and give you the keys to unlock your successful tech career. I'm your host, Grace McJones. Let's unlock the future together. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Tech Unlock podcast. Today on the show, I'm excited for my guest. We actually recently connected through LinkedIn, and we're talking about, how to break into data science, but most importantly, how to self-advocate. I know a lot of people have a different definition of what that means, but basically how to get what you want within your tech career. And I have the perfect guest with me on the show. I have Shailvi Wakhlu. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Grace. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Data science, data engineering, anything within data is like really hot right now within tech, despite all the craziness with the tech layoffs and things like that. I was actually looking on Glassdoor earlier, and it shows that the average salary for someone working in data science is about $113K to $125K, which I'm like, that's pretty good. Tell us a bit more of your experience in terms of like what got you interested in data. You're someone that has over 17 plus years as a data leader. What got you into data science in the first place?
Love that you started with sort of the salary anchoring, because I think that's a great way to attract people in the field. But I also think it's a really nice area to work in. My start in the field was I started off as a software engineer, and I almost stumbled into data science. I had a boss who said, "Hey, have you considered being an analyst?" I had no idea what that meant, but he made it sound fun, and it was a transition that I made in an existing job that I had. And I'm so grateful for that transition, because I wasn't seeking it out at that point. It wasn't the hard job. It was something that I'd never heard of before, but it ended up working out.
In terms of like maybe not having the experience, how did you go about tailoring, let's say, like your resume or preparing for interviews for something that you don't really have a lot of experience for, even though you had a sweet experience?
Data is one of those fields that tends to attract people from everywhere. And I think that's fantastic, because there's different types of data that people are working on. So I really do think that that domain knowledge that people bring in from different industries, from different domains, it really helps. For anybody who's stepping into data science, they should keep that in mind, that all your past experience is still relevant. There is, of course, specific things that data jobs are looking for. Whether you're applying to be an analyst or a machine learning engineer or a data engineer, you have to think about what are those particular skills. So in my case, I had a lot of overlapping skills with programming. There was a lot of coding and algorithmic type of problems that I had done before. In my case, I was already at the company, so it was an easier transition. But in all other future jobs, I leaned on those pieces that I know the fundamentals of how to take an ambiguous problem, solve it. But I had to showcase the data specific problems that I had worked on. Even if your current job doesn't allow you those opportunities, looking outside for projects that help you showcase those skills is a great way for anybody who's stepping into that field new.
Thanks for that clear definition. And something that you mentioned got my head going about kind of like the differences between that family of data. I feel like we use just data science, and it's more than that. So can you tell us the difference between a data science, data engineering, and data analyst? Like, is there kind of a hierarchy, or is it just a different field in terms of the actual skill set and the day-to-day life of that career?
I love that question, because it allows me to step into controversy right away.
Oh, okay, let's go. I'm interested in what you have to say. Yeah.
There's an angel syndicate that I'm part of. We only invest in data companies. And one of the running jokes that we have is that as an industry, we haven't even defined the different data
Mhm.
roles. Like every company almost has their own little definition. It's hard, for people stepping into this function. They're like, do I need to go after the role that says data scientist? Am I looking for the data engineer? So I love this, because I think there's a lot of differing opinions. I think one that I have heard repeated often, which is what I align to as well, is that data science is the umbrella term across everything data. There are going to be some people who are going to argue with me and say that no, it is only if you launch a machine learning model. And I react to that and say, but there's a separate term called machine learning engineer who does that. Machine learning engineer plus analytics plus data engineering plus visualization, all of those things combined fall under the umbrella of data science. So some companies use it as a generic term. It means that you might be doing a mix and match of these different pieces. And in some cases, it's true that the data scientist is really just focusing on machine learning algorithms and models. So that's why there's that constant confusion of like, what is this role specifically? And it's interesting to navigate that.
So with, 17 plus years within data, you've worked at Salesforce, Strava, Fitbit, a lot of different companies. If you had to restart your career all over again in 2024, what would you do differently with all the knowledge and experience that you have now?
I would say that if I was restarting my career, one thing that I would anchor on is sort of letting go of expectations of what my career might look like 10 years later. Like, I think it is
Mm-hmm.
helpful to have something in mind that you're working towards. I also especially feel that right now, there's a tough market out there right now when some people are almost forced to rethink their entire plan. And I think it can be really painful for people who have only this one idea of how their career can turn out. That's the thing that I would warn people against, that if I was starting my career over again, I would let go of any fixed notions of how my career would end up, what path I would take. Because in my case, I started as an engineer, I moved into data, I stepped into entrepreneurship in and out multiple times, and it's worked out great so far. And I'm very confident that it'll move on. And anybody you speak to, who's had like, if you speak to those people who've had like 30 years of like a great career, they almost always say that, hey, my career was not linear. It started with one thing, I pivoted at some point, I went back to something that I had let go of at some point. And being open to those ideas, being open to learning new skills, being open to just going with the flow and adapting as the needs of the market change, I think is super important. And I really hope that people like really take that as something that hopefully is reassuring in this market, that if you're trying out something completely different, that's okay. It may end up being the best thing you ever did.
I think it's hard for people to kind of shift because for a long time, tech has been a path where it felt very secure. And then we're like, wow, never mind. It's not as secure as we thought. And a lot of people, like you said, have been within tech for a long time or have seen tech to be that type of industry. And now that it's shaking up a little, everyone's like, maybe this might not be as secure as I thought. So I love that you shared that feedback from a mindset perspective. Like you have to be open minded, and it's okay if things don't go the way that it goes, or that you thought that was supposed to go. That's a mindset level. But from a skills level, what kind of skills would you have either focused on or would advise people to focus on to just be ready in case they really do see themselves in data science or within the data world and they want to be as prepared as possible and they're looking for ways to stand out within their resume? Like, what advice would you give them?
I would say that we are right now, and I truly believe this, that I do think that we're in a world right now where there's a lot of stuff going on with AI. Every company almost has to focus on it. It's not an option. Your
Yeah.
investors are not going to be okay if you're not focusing on it. And with that, there is some hype and there is something which is real, which is just that yes, things are going to change. The jobs that people are doing right now, like there are going to be parts of it that are going to shift. For software engineers, for example, like yes, you can have something generate code that cuts out the need for a little bit of that initial steps. So I think people can stand out with skills in terms, like I think I would say there's two main things. One is, don't be afraid of how rapidly everything is changing. Like really boil it down to the fundamentals of what are the differences that are happening and what can I do as steps to learn the new skills that are going to be valuable. And it's not radical. It's not like you're going to have to do a completely different job. You're just going to have to get better at pieces that are less prone to automation, or more around creative thinking itself. That second piece, the creative thinking piece, I would tie that back to business fundamentals. I have always said this to anybody I have worked with. Like, I've run really large teams in the past, and every person who worked under me has heard me say it. I can teach somebody data science skills. I can teach them how to code. I can teach them how to fine tune an algorithm. But it is harder to teach people about like caring about the business and really understanding what matters, how to map efforts to things that actually generate money. That is never going to get out of fashion. I think people who are on the market who separate themselves by that, by really understanding business fundamentals, by really understanding product fundamentals, like this is the product, this is how it serves customers, this is how it will be better. Don't be a hammer, an AI hammer looking for a nail. Think of the problems that people are facing and then think of the technology solutions that can help address those problems.
I love that. That's absolutely brilliant. I feel like people get in the weeds of like, okay, do I have, do I know SQL? Do I know Python? Do I know all this stuff? And obviously it's important because during the interview, there are going to be those technical questions, but I think zooming out and looking at the bigger picture of like, okay, what is the problem this company is trying to solve with data, right? And how
Yeah.
can I come in telling a good story or help them identify how to use data to find opportunities or to solve problems? And so I think thinking on a larger scale can help people stand out in terms of like going to the job market if they don't have maybe set data skills and whatnot. So I love that you brought that perspective because that's not something that a lot of people are thinking about.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I want to kind of shift a little bit to, how you've transformed your career, not just within data science, but outside of the tech industry, which I feel like a lot of people find it hard to leave because it's golden handcuffs. I started the episode talking about the salary range, and I'm sure it's bigger for people who are leaders. I know you've led teams over, with more than 30 people in your team. And so that can be hard to let go of, right? In terms of like being a prominent data leader. But in 2022, you had the foresight to live your big tech job and to kind of work on something different. And I'm curious as to how you got the confidence to do that. And obviously, after 2022, things just went, a different direction within tech. So, what gave you the confidence to leave your big tech company as the head of data to follow your passions and to follow your dreams?
I often reflect back on what was going through my mind when I decided to leave a very cushy job, which I was doing really well at, and which I genuinely really enjoyed. But I'm a huge nerd of like making sure people have their sort of finances in order. So one thing I'd
Mm.
say to anybody, like you can end up in this situation involuntarily, but if you choose to try something different, get your financial ducks in a row. Like make sure you have that buffer of how long. Anytime you start trying something out completely different, it takes a little while to get it off the ground. And so in my case, that was one of the things that I had built up savings where I had a certain amount of time when I could earn no paycheck and not be panicking. That was sort of like step one. But the other like biggest motivator for me was that I had been speaking about the topic of self advocacy for years at that point. And it was something completely unconnected to my data role. It seemed to really resonate. I was invited as a speaker for a lot of conferences, a lot of forums. That was the time at which people also kept asking me like, hey, do you have a book that I can read? So it was a long held dream that I wanted to write a book, and I think the topic found me because I started speaking about the topic and it seemed to resonate. That was sort of the big reason that I left my job, because I said that I tried, for a year, I tried to have my full time job and write the book. I think I wrote 3,000 words in that one year. And
Wow.
then after I quit my job, like in 4 months, I had 40,000 more words. So, huge difference. That was the biggest motivation for me. I said, I felt that I had something outside tech that had the capacity to earn me some money and really affect people, like, through either from people who read about the topic or hear about the topic. And so it was a bit of a gamble. In retrospect, maybe November 2022 was not the best time to leave my job, but it worked out. Like I no regrets.
No, I love that. I think you said a couple of things. Having something outside of tech or a day job is such an important piece of not tying your whole identity to your job, because that's when it hurts the most, when you're expected to either, step back or you experience a layoff, which you're not planning for financially. And
Yeah.
so I've been talking to my mentees who are in college right now. I'm going through like looking for jobs, and I'm like, yeah, like working in tech or any job is great, but make sure that you don't lose touch of those passions and things that you love, because it grounds you, but it also gives you avenues for, creating another source of income, or also being, invited to certain experiences or opportunities. Like for you talked about speaking. And I think that the topic that you picked, or the topic that chose you, is very important, self-advocacy, because within tech, I feel like first of all, there's not a lot of women in the industry, or Black or brown women. And so even when you're in the industry, it's hard for you to stand up for yourself, because you just feel like it was hard enough to get here in the first place. I don't want to ruffle any feathers or come across as rude or needy or whatever it is. And so I'm curious, what led you to talking more about this topic? Was it a personal experience? Was it something that you encountered that, motivated you to write about self-advocacy?
All women of color in tech, definitely, it's a topic that clicks. I think for all of us, because it is a string of experiences that led me to create a structure around the topic and present it. The first time I did that, it was at a tech conference, and they said, hey, if you want to talk about something other than data, that's cool too. So I used to only talk about data, and then I randomly picked the topic of self advocacy because it was fresh on my mind at that time. It wasn't one incident, it was just like a string of things, kind of seeing patterns in my career of like, I think all of us at some point have had that feeling of, hey, why is this other person getting promoted and not me? I'm just as good, if not better than them. Why did I hesitate in asking for a raise, or why did I hesitate in negotiating at that job? So I think it was a string of those things, that there was some things that I did really well. So negotiating salaries at a job, I have fortunately always been really good at that. Like that was something that I did really well. Sort of standing up for myself in the moment when things happened, sort of reacting in the moment is not, it was not my strength. I felt that I'm coming across as angry, and it's not really getting me the outcome I want. And so I almost started breaking that down, like, because I am a data leader at the end of the day. So I started breaking it down into its components and sort of examining that, okay, what would it take? Like, the moment has gone. I didn't really do what I wanted in the moment. But if in the future something similar was to happen, like, it doesn't have to be the same exact situation, but what are the components of it that I can think about so that it is easier for me to respond in the way I want to in the future? That was sort of the push for it, that I started breaking it down into kind of like almost an algorithm of sorts, that, if this, then X, or something like that. And that was just something that I felt like I enjoyed creating that, but I also felt that it is something that might resonate with other people, like actually breaking down problems into its components. And the first time I shared it, it went like, it was very well received. So I just kept sharing it until I found enough people who thought that this is something that every tech person needs. Like, it is not a skill we are taught. We're taught how to code, but we're not necessarily taught how to stand up for ourselves. And but of course we need to do it too. Like, it's not something that tech people don't need.
100% agree. I think there are some skills that, especially we call them like the hard skills, that are easy to teach. But when it comes to soft skills, I hate saying soft skills because there's nothing soft about it. They're much harder. Or human skills, it's definitely hard, to develop a sense of, self-advocacy, or even empathy, or different things where it's easily talked about, but it's hard to develop. And there's also always like a cultural context in that conversation, because some people who grew up maybe in a non-Western culture have a different way of, thinking about self-advocacy. They're like, oh no, that's, too much. And if I come from a culture where, you're supposed to be humble and not, talk to people who are above you, it's now hard if you work in the Western culture to try and showcase, the impact that you're having without coming across as something else. And so when it comes to this topic of self-advocacy, and someone is listening right now, first of all, how do you define self-advocacy, right? Is it like tooting your own horn and like, look at me and all the great things I've done? Or is it something else? And what are some practical ways that people can practice, advocating for themselves in the workplace?
My definition for self advocacy is anything that you do or say which is in the best interest of your career, that is self advocacy. And sometimes it is proactive. Like some situations, you just know that, in this situation I can present myself in a nice light, or I can really, like, hide in the corner and not not really show up. So there's that option. But that is proactive self advocacy, when you know that it is important how you show up, and you do it. And then there's sort of the reactive self advocacy, that you have a specific situation to respond to. It may not even be sort of in your, like, it's not that, okay, it happened just now, but like things like, how do I pitch myself for a promotion? How do I pitch myself for a raise? How do I land that opportunity that I know will go for my career? Or, something happened which is not in my best interest and I need to now respond. That is self advocacy. And I think the overarching theme for all of it is to, one, recognize that self advocacy is important for your career, that you can be really lucky. Maybe you have a great manager who understands what you need and who puts you in situations that are better for your career. But in most cases, people are not usually that lucky. Or, like, maybe you have a great manager and then they leave, or you change your company or something like that. I always tell everybody, like, I've coached like 500 people by now. And I always say, like, would you rather have the reins of your career in your hands, or would you rather hand control to someone else who may or may not stick with you for your entire career? I push people to think about what they want out of their career. Like, if you're getting everything that you want, fantastic, great for you. But if you're not, what is in your control that you can do that helps increase the odds that you will eventually get what you want?
That's awesome. And on the flip side, I'm going to ask, what happens when we don't self advocate? Like, what kind of cycles do we find ourselves in, and, opportunities that we miss out of because we're not really showcasing things that are in our best interest?
That's again something that I'm pretty sure, like, it has happened to almost everybody at some point of time or the other. They were either surprised that, hey, how come I'm a smart data scientist, I have worked on all these projects, but this great project came up, and how come I wasn't the one who got it? Or, how come I wasn't asked to lead it, even though I have the most experience on the team, or something like that. Like, people have missed out on promotions, people have not landed jobs, people have been surprised that other people on the team were praised and not them. And sometimes people are not surprised. They get into that resentment mode of, this always happens to me. I'm never the one who's praised. I'm never the one who's acknowledged.
Yep.
I think those are the situations where it's an opportunity for you to reflect on how you're showing up. That, was it really completely random that you thought you were going to get something better for your career and it didn't happen? Or is there something that you could have done? Did your boss even know that you are working on really tough projects and you have effectively solved them? Or did they just know that you started something and finished something? Like, there's a lot of reflection that I think people can do if they generally observe that in their career, they are not getting the rewards that they feel they have earned in terms of opportunities, pay, title, acknowledgement, whatever it may be, or that things are happening around them which are not in their best interest, and they just don't know how to sort of turn it back into something that's better for them.
You talked about promotions and, earlier negotiating, because I think those are the top two areas where everyone has kind of like a conflict or friction with, where it's uncomfortable to talk about wanting it. For some people are good with it. But for others, it's like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. Or they've been having this conversation and it's hitting a roadblock. So can we talk about some practical ways? And I know you have, a section in your book where you talking about promotions and, negotiating. But for those listening, what are some practical ways that people can actively self-advocate for themselves when they're gunning for a promotion at work?
I love the topic of promotions because I think it's, especially in this market, I've heard a lot of people say that, oh, tech is going through a moment right now, like all promotions are on hold. And it's not great for companies either if you are resentful and just start doing less, or, don't do your best job because you don't feel like your efforts are being acknowledged. There's fewer jobs than there were, say, a year or 2 years ago. It's hard for companies to hire as well. So, I always like people to start with that don't think the company is doing you a favor by rewarding what you have already achieved. I have yet to meet a company. I think most companies have the lagging indicator format of promotion, where you have to show that you're performing at the next level before they give you a promotion. So it's not based
Yeah.
on future possibilities. It's like, okay, you were doing the work of a data scientist. You have proved that you are now doing the work of a senior data scientist, and that's the promotion. They are not doing you a favor. If anything, sometimes they just lag way too long. Like, you've been doing that for a year, and then they finally reward you. So one practical thing that I always suggest to people is that, um, one, figure out who's actually going to be involved in your promotion. Most of the times it's your boss, but it could be your boss and HR and your department lead, or maybe there are other sponsors, your stakeholders. So have that knowledge, be intentional about figuring out who is going to sign off on my promotion, because those are the people you need to keep on your radar. Those are the people who you should be on their radar. They should understand what you're doing. They should understand how you're adding value. And then the very specific thing to do is to actually ask, most likely your boss, or maybe in some cases it might be HR, but actually ask them that, hey, the phrasing that I go with is that, hey, I would like to grow in my career, and I want to make sure that the work that I'm doing is adding up to things that showcase higher order skills. So what should I be working on, that I'm not already working on, or what should I be doing different so that I'm ready for a promotion in, and then you can say X amount of time or something, and be realistic. If this is the first time you're having the conversation, don't say like, tomorrow I want a promotion, what can I do? That takes the pressure off. Like, you are not asking for a promotion, you are asking for help so that you can figure out how to get promoted. And I think a lot of people who kind of shift that mindset, they're asking for information, they're asking for help, they're asking for tangible things that they can do, because most people don't get feedback unless they ask for it. Like, again, some managers, they're fantastic at it, but if you're not getting that feedback actively, and you only hear it during the performance review cycle, and then you realize you've spent 6 months working on something that kind of was a waste of time, like it didn't show higher order skills, I think it gives you that great opportunity to pivot and sort of recalibrate what you need to be working on.
You said so much right there. I'm like, okay, where do I start? Okay. I love that you talk about being aware of who actually helps make a promotion, and the company isn't really doing a favor by promoting you, because you've actually been doing more work usually than the level that you're in right now. I'm wondering, are there common mistakes people make when trying to self-advocate for themselves? Because some people might be self-sabotaging sometimes, but they're not aware. So based on your experience and your conversations, what are some of the common mistakes people make when they're trying to self-advocate for themselves?
That's a great point, and it's something that came up recently. I was at an event, and there was a lot of people in the room, and we were having some group discussions later. And I realized that a lot of times when people are trying to articulate what they need, they end up focusing on what hurt them or what upset them. So
Mm.
the focus is on, oh, like, I'm upset that I have all this extra work, and I'm working 60 hours a week, and there's no extra compensation for it, and it's not even being acknowledged. So, and I get it, like that's fair, right? Like, if you're being asked to work 60 hours a week and nobody's even acknowledging it, leave alone rewarding you, that is upsetting. If you shift that conversation from I'm upset to what is the best thing for the business, like, if it's framed as like, hey, we clearly have too much work and not enough people, how do we stack rank the work that we have so that everybody is working on the highest or most important things, because it is not fitting in that standard 40-hour work week. And that forces that discussion. Then it's not like, oh, I am hurt because you made me work for weeks extra. Then it is about, I noticed a problem that we have too much work, and how do we make sure we are working on the most important thing. It really shifts that conversation. It shifts that conversation to also it being about the business, that the business would want to spend their time on the most important things. if I'm just trying to do everything, I may end up doing things that are not important. So can we have clarity on what is the highest, most impactful sort of stuff? And then, then you can, of course, like as part of that, you can say that, hey, this is not sustainable for me to work 60 hours a week. So I would like to know where to draw the line. I mean, you shouldn't be asking where to draw the line, but like, I want to know the order of things so that I draw the line at which I'm not overworked. People, otherwise, they might get burnt out, they might be resentful, and they might bounce, right? Like there might be another job that maybe even pays them the exact same amount of money, but they make some reassurances that you're not going to be burnt out. So I would say that that is a very common thing that people say, that they make it about them, and yes, it is about them. But how do you shift the framing so that it's the other person sees what's in their best interest to do?
That is very critical. I see that mistake too all the time where people are like, well, I've been here X amount of, years and months and this is, happening to me. And it's like, we have to acknowledge in corporate world, there are some unsaid things or a way of talking about certain things. Yes, it feels like a game sometimes, but it's like, yeah, like if you're not, phrasing things in a way that benefits the company, then it's kind of like, oh, poor you. Like, so is five other people who have been, either working and not getting promoted. Not saying that you should stay in a toxic environment, but it's just one of those things where you want to make sure that your ask doesn't come out as, something that's just self-centered and me, because it's like, oh, like, that's not a business justification, right? And so when you use the right language in the given context of the company and what you do, then it's a more inspiring motivation for your team or your managers to be like, oh yeah, they do have a good point of like, this is the impact that they've had over the past amount of years, and move forward, hopefully give you a promotion. But even with that, what happens when you've been doing that and it's not working? What
uh,
next?
it's fair to say that you may even be super direct, like situations can happen where you've sort of asked for the help with the like keep sticking with the promotion example, like you've asked for the help, like, okay, I would like help in figuring out how I get promoted, and maybe what you receive is not that promising, or maybe your manager responds in a negative way saying like, oh, you're so far away from promotion or something like that. Sometimes you can bring up what you want and you don't get the response that you would like. That's okay. I think at least you now know, like any even a no, or even I don't care about what you care about, is a lot of
Mhm.
extra information that you don't have unless you ask. And so I always say that then you're free to decide your next steps. You're free to say like, do I just want to phrase it differently? Like, is it a problem with how I'm showcasing this? Can I ask some friends for feedback that, hey, I said this, my boss responded with this, is there something else that I can try? But if you've reached that conclusion where you're not going to get a different answer, it's always going to be the same answer that you don't like, that's freeing, right? Like you can then decide that, okay, does this role, team, manager, whatever it is, like, how does it stack rank with my career values? Like, does this meet what I wanted to, or is this piece that I'm hearing a no on really significant for me? And I always think that what you don't want to be in a situation where you have no options, and that's when you're trying to figure out plan B. Always make your plan B sooner rather than later. If things don't go your way, it is much easier to shift into the plan B mindset rather than trying to come up with it at that point.
Let's talk about plan B, because I feel like a lot of people wait till they're in a desperate position, and then it's hard mentally because now you're like, oh, I don't like my job or it's demanding, but you don't have the bandwidth, right, to maybe engage with other things that can give you the opportunity. But I feel like you're someone who has always thought about, okay, what next, or plan B, because seeing how you pivot from, the corporate world, even though I used to consult with a lot of startups and businesses, but finding that topic and like, oh, okay, this could be something else, right? Like this could be in case, not saying in case things don't work out, but in case you wanted to do something different, like taking the time to explore an alternative career or passion is so necessary. And so how can someone right now, if they're in a situation where it's like the writing's on the wall, Things aren't going great. They've kind of done everything we've talked about. How do they go about exploring a plan B option for themselves personally or for their career?
We're fortunate to live in a world right now where there's so many people who are willing to share information about how they've done it, how they transitioned into whatever was sort of next. So I think especially people in tech are lucky in that sense that there are so many people who are from a tech background who have then gone on to do like whatever you pick. I'm pretty sure there's another tech person who did that
Yeah.
transition. So
Yep.
it's super helpful. And yeah, and people put up their interviews on YouTube, like even this podcast. I know some of the past guests that you've had, like there is so much information that people are willing to share. I think that is the step that people should start with. Like first narrow down like some broad things that you at least like I think it's hard to or harder to pick up or ramp up on new skills when it's not something that you inherently like, or not something that you inherently feel passionate about. So my example, I love speaking. You can call me to speak anytime. I've always enjoyed speaking. I always enjoyed writing. Once I figured out how to actually make money doing that, like that was a huge unlock, because I'm like, hey, this is actually something that I love doing. Like it came below coding for me, but coding, I already got paid. I already got paid for that. So figuring out what do you like, what can you get paid for, that ikagai concept, and what does the
Mhm.
world need. I think going through that exercise really helps, because you can narrow down a few options. And this, I'll say that anything that you try, it is going to take a long time for you to see traction. Like I must have done 100 speaking engagements, before people almost consider that a norm for me. Before people almost consider that okay, yeah, this is something that you do, and I'm happy to pay you for it. So it takes a while. Expecting that, oh, I'm just going to go on YouTube tomorrow and become an influencer. It's really hard to do.
Yeah, I love the examples that you gave and the reality of it. Like it's not overnight. Like
Yeah,
you've been putting in the time, the effort to talk about this, to go to conferences outside of your work, put in time to network, to communicate, to write, so it doesn't come easy, but the effort is compounding, right? Like a little bit every week, every day, every month, reaching out to people, consuming content that you feel like is valuable to you
yeah.
definitely helps create a sense of, okay, what could be next for you while you're on this journey. And obviously, I know we can talk about a lot more, but there's more value and more nuggets in your book called Self-Advocacy. And we can find it on Amazon. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I'll definitely put the link in the show notes. And I just want to say thank you for just being so candid about your career and how folks can advocate for themselves in a way that it's not impossible. Like, because sometimes you can get in that mindset where it's like, okay, like everything is going wrong for me. I can't do anything. It's like, no, you have the power to decide, to make some decisions. There's some things within your control that you can work on. So I think this is such a powerful reminder for all of us listening that, yes, definitely speak up about things that you're doing within work so that you can get the recognition that you deserve. And with that, we're going to move into a lightning round where we get to learn a little bit about you. And so, in 30 seconds or less, just answer this question so we can learn a bit more about you. All
Okay.
right. So, the first question: what is your favorite piece of technology?
I would have to say computers. Like I can't live without it.
What was the last book you read?
The last book that I read is something called Die with Zero. It's not as doom and gloom as it sounds. It's a very,
Mhm.
very useful sort of financial book.
What is the most used app on your phone?
I have lately been spending a lot of time on threads. It's just that time of the election cycle, I guess. I don't know.
That makes sense. Yeah, I feel like everyone's inundated with all the politics happening. If you're in the US, you understand.
Yeah,
What is one thing you wish you would have known about data science before you got in?
that nobody can agree on the terminology.
That is so good. What is one piece of advice that has really helped your career?
I think it's that you should optimize for the career that you want, not what your neighbor wants, not what your college roommate wants or your mother wants. Like, optimize for what you want and for what you really crave.
What is the last TV show that you watched that you really enjoyed?
I have been watching something called Little Fires Everywhere, and I am very fascinated by the
On
show.
Hulu.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I
So
watched it a few years ago. Definitely very addicting. Last question: if you could solve one problem using technology, what would it be?
I would say that it would have to be how the world connects, like at a really core level. So real problems that people have, like I feel like there's always somebody who already has knows how to solve that problem. So some version of a social network, maybe, but which actually solves real problems.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I know that I learned a lot from our conversation, and I know people listening also learned a lot. If people want to get in contact with you, where's the place that they can connect with you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. So Shailvi W is my handle, and people can get in touch with me there. And I also have a website, shelby.com. So easy peasy. People hopefully remember it. But thank you so much, Grace. It was super nice to be on this podcast. I've been following you for a long time, so appreciate having me on.
Thank you. No, this was great. And once again, definitely look up the book on Amazon. We only touched a little bit about some of the key facts about, advocating for your career and growing in your career. So definitely get Shelby's book. I will have the link in the show notes and in, the caption. And I hope that you enjoy this episode, and I'll catch you all next week.